Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, my panel. Hi. Wow, these lights are bright. They were not lying about that. Thanks so much for having us today. It's wonderful to see so many colleagues and old colleagues in this beautiful venue. So today we are going to have a panel about strategies to end rape culture and misogyny. So I think it's fair enough to say that violence against women and girls certainly does not start with physical harm. It begins with attitudes, with language, and with everyday behaviours that are increasingly being normalised. And in recent years, we may have been seeing remarkable progress in some quarters, but unfortunately, we've also seen a real rolling back of women's rights and a worrying resurgence of misogyny, both online and offline. From the rise of online hate movements and to the mainstreaming of hateful influences. And I'm sure I don't need to mention any of them by name. I think we should have a rule to not name them. At the same time, there is hope, and there is definitely really amazing examples of powerful activism, survivors coming to the fore, and new forms of education that are truly shifting the narrative and challenging systems. So today's discussion, we're going to bring through 3 experts who can talk to us today about how we tackle misogyny and really put a spotlight on rape culture that is normalising some of these truly problematic behaviours. So I'm going to introduce my panel, and I am going to start with Eliza. So Eliza is a photographer, a speaker, and a curator. And they founded Cheer Up Luv 8 years ago, which is a photo series of women and gender diverse people and their experience of public harassment. And then secondly, we're going to talk to Ellie. And Ellie is the chief of staff for Everyone's Invited, when she's a founding member of the movement. And since its inception, she's played a central role in shaping the organisation's mission to expose and to eradicate rape culture. And then finally, Charli. Charli works for Our Streets Now, which is a brilliant advocacy organisation which really puts the spotlight on gender justice and public sexual harassment. And I was just saying to Charli earlier how much I admire Charli's social media output. Always give her a watch. Right, intro's done, and we will start with a few questions. Right, so the first one is quite a general question, really kind of introducing your organisation and your approach. So each of your organisations have an approach to tackling misogyny and rape culture. Can you talk about your role in the organisation's activism in challenging the cultural norms that sustain violence? And if we start with Eliza, please.
Yeah, sure. So I founded, as you said, my introduction, I founded Cheer Up Luv 8 years ago. It started as a photo series recounting and retelling stories of sexual harassment through photographing survivors standing in the place that they were assaulted, harassed, and kind of using those locations as a stage to reclaim, to speak out, and to kind of take back control of those experiences in order to raise awareness about the issue, but also kind of change the culture around it and change the kind of conversation. This was a time where it was like kind of pre-Me Too. It was early 2017 really. And that was kind of place where it began. And then since then has evolved into a multimedia platform educating around everyday misogyny and kind of like how to break taboos and myth bust by creating like educational content, curating exhibitions, using art for activism, doing workshops, talks, and all sorts of things like that.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And the same question to you, Ellie.
Firstly, thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be with these wonderful people. I'm Ellie, and I'm the Chief of Staff and one of the founding members of Everyone's Invited. So Everyone's Invited started 5 years ago as an online movement after our CEO and founder, Soma Sara, shared her experience of rape culture and sexual violence on her Instagram account. She put up her story and she started getting all of her friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends sending messages in saying, actually, this exact same thing has happened to me and I've never really picked up on it. I've never really realised before. And at the end of that week, it was hundreds of stories. And at the end of that month, it was thousands. So she went on to set up an anonymous website called Everyone's Invited. And on that website, you could share your experience of sexual abuse during your time at school, but you could also name the institution that you were at when it happened. In March of 2021, it absolutely exploded. We had over 50,000 testimonies on our website, over 6,000 schools named. It was spoken about on the back of buses, in classrooms, and even in government. And it prompted this kind of mass media storm and conversation. Students were walking out of their schools in protests. They were creating their own mini Everyone's Invited movements in their own schools. And Ofsted then launched a report into sexual abuse in school in June of 2021. And essentially, they said, look, if you're a school in the UK, you should assume that abuse is happening in your school. That's how widespread this issue is. So we then turned into a charity with a mission to expose and eradicate rape culture, and we have 4 pillars that we work around. So we run an education program. We've worked with 67,000 students in 3 years. We do a lot of advocacy work, so using the information from those testimonies, but also research work. So we have one of the largest data sets on sexual violence in the UK, and it's completely untouched. So we know that in those testimonies and in that data, there are some answers, and there are also potentially some new trends as well. And then we also maintain that safe space. So we still have testimonies coming in all the time. We're completely youth and survivor-led. Our education program is co-designed by young people. And the next 5 years, we're looking at mining that data, finding out some answers, and delivering our education to 10% of all state secondary schools across the UK.
Fantastic. That's great. And that's great to hear that there is an effort to mine that data. Because when you said it was untouched, I thought we need to get some funding so that you guys can analyse
Exactly.
it.
We need the money.
Need the money. We were just talking about that. We need the money. And finally to you, Charlie.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie. I'm from Our Streets Now. Our Streets Now is a youth-centred organisation that focuses specifically on public sexual harassment. We are 6 years old now, which is really exciting. And we started when 2 sisters were essentially having a conversation about their own experiences of public sexual harassment and realised actually the scale of public sexual harassment in their lives and their friends' lives was so huge that they wanted to do something that was going to make a change on that issue. When they went to go and look at what was actually happening when it came to public sexual harassment in the UK, they realised that it wasn't a crime, it wasn't a standalone offence in the UK. So they started a petition to change the law. In less than 6 months, they got over 100,000 signatures, which is massive and very, very exciting. And in 2023, that law changed with the sex-based harassment bill, which is huge, but still hasn't come into effect. It hasn't commenced yet, so that law doesn't actually exist in the same way. Alongside that piece of kind of legislative work, lots of amazing activists joined Our Streets Now and started thinking about what are the alternatives to just thinking about this through a kind of like policy and legislative lens. And they thought, actually, there's some really important preventative education work that needs to happen too. So our schools kind of work and also our universities' work came together and started running workshops in schools, running kind of teacher panels, student panels, to really understand what was happening when it came to public sexual harassment in schools and universities. And we continue to do that work now. We've also recently branched out into doing specific work in sports with some incredible ambassadors across the UK because we've realised that there is a massive, massive problem in sports around public sexual harassment and harassment more widely as well. So looking at kind of like what that kind of looks like, and we've done some amazing training with some amazing kind of national governing bodies recently too. So yeah, looking at that kind of preventative education and preventative legislative lens.
Thank you so much. And I think what's striking about all your answers is how, when you built these platforms, how prevalent, how many people came to you, how much they needed that space to be able to share their experiences, and how common it is. I mean, I work for Fawcett Society. We've been campaigning for misogyny to be a hate crime for many years. I was talking to some police officers who were very, very much against it. Their main argument being the court system couldn't cope, which seems like a bit of a, off reason to not do something because it's such a problem that we possibly couldn't cope with the outcomes. Okay, so moving on to our second question, and we're really looking about rebuilding our culture brick by brick. So this is quite an ambitious question to answer in a very short space of time, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about one belief or behaviour that you'd love to dismantle within our society that you think would be really impactful, and if you dismantled it, what would you replace it with? And I am going to start with Ellie, if that's okay.
Yeah. So the thing that always sticks out for me, and it's what I think is kind of one of the most important things that we teach when we go into schools, is our perceptions of sexual violence and our perceptions of rape. when we work with young people, the ideas and the narrative that they are being fed around what rape and sexual abuse looks like is an incredibly sensationalized, overtly violent act. And they're constantly being told, don't talk to strangers, don't walk down dark alleyways, don't get the bus late home at night. And the only time that they're seeing it in the media is kind of those sort of stranger danger events, things that are actually do happen, but are quite rare. 97% of victims are known to their perpetrators. And so when we go in and we say, unfortunately, this is a lot closer to home than you've been told your whole life, it's a massive shock. And I think that changing those perceptions and being like, look, this is likely to happen around you. It's likely to happen from a friend, a family member, a colleague, a partner in those kind of first formative sexual experiences. And the problem is when we have that perception that it's just that stranger down a dark alleyway, we're not being realistic about what the issue is, and we're not giving young people and survivors the space to recognize that what's happened to them is wrong. It's more than just an off feeling or a weird feeling or them saying, well, this is what I thought sex was meant to be or look like. This is actually illegal. And this is rape, it is sexual abuse. And so I think that's one of the most important things is to challenge those narratives. And I think I would replace it with, we all have the ability to be good people and bad people, right? But it's about how we raise people. And so I think, the key is making sure that education is happening sooner, earlier. A lot of the time I feel like we're doing intervention work, not genuine prevention work. And it's the one thing we always hear from students is like, you're getting here too late. And the next is that, just believing survivor voices, which is like a simple thing. It should, we should be able to have that, right? That's the least that we should be able to provide. But still, we've got 52,000 testimonies on our website, and we still get people coming to us saying, but how do you know they haven't made it up? So that's my take on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's shocking. How do you know that they haven't made it up? All 52,000 of them. Okay. Right, moving on to Charli.
Yeah, I think actually it's really interesting. I think we've got very connected ideas of what we would like to dismantle. And for me, it's this really binary perception around what it means to be a victim or a perpetrator. So to be a victim or survivor means that you are a victim or survivor, and to be a perpetrator means that you are a perpetrator. And I would replace that with this idea that actually all of us have the ability to cause harm, and all of us have the ability to have harm caused to us. And I think that that's really, really important, especially when we're thinking about this from a very intersectional perspective and thinking actually, there are so many different experiences of gender-based violence that exist in that way. And there are some things that will be completely unknown to one person and very known to another. And that will massively impact the way that they go to services or talk about their experiences, who they talk about their experiences to, etc. And I think that that's really, really important as well, of being actually we're all causing harm at some point and we're all going to receive harm at some point. And how can we shift that mentality to really understand that we need to have slightly more transformative approaches to solutions to gender-based violence, which really, again, comes back to that education perspective too.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And lastly, on to Eliza.
Yeah, so I think mine would be going back to basics a little bit, because when I started this work 8 years ago, the conversation, there maybe was some conversation happening online and in specific feminist spaces and communities, but it wasn't part of the wider discourse. So part of what I was trying to challenge was this idea that, the small stuff in quotation marks didn't matter so much, the micro forms of everyday harassment, everyday sexism. And then, over the years, I feel society's perception of that really changed. But at the moment, I feel we're in a bit of a swing back and there's a bit of a backlash towards all things feminist, and I guess this general conversation that we're having around, preventing and tackling violence against women and girls. So I want to bring it, just go back to square one and challenge that, these everyday normalized forms of micro and quotation marks harassment, that they are, not that bad. They are the bedrock and foundation of all forms of, violence. And I think if we ignore that stuff, then how are we going to tackle the rest of it? Because it's all linked.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that cultural point, every time I talk to women's organisations, they talk about this fear that things are rolling back, that there is an increasingly loud narrative to disbelieve women and to start to push back against some of these feelings? I mean, the first question I got asked when I started this job was, do you really need organisations like this anymore? Feminism's done what it needs to do. And you just said, yeah. And that was a BBC journalist that asked me that as well. It wasn't some kind of, it was really mainstream question. You just think the kind of disconnect between a question like that and the reality that women and girls are going through every day is just, it's crazy. Okay, I'm going to start with our last question, actually, because I can see, I'm on the time. So on our last question, and just on that point about the kind of rolling back of our rights, I think it's really important to try and find hope where we can. So this is going to be our last question, is around hope. So after all you've witnessed in your work with your organisations, what gives you hope that one day we can truly live in a culture that is respectful and consent-based? And I'm going to start with you, Charli, if that's okay.
Beautiful. I actually have two things, but I'm going to be really quick.
Okay.
One of them is the incredible pool of volunteers that we've had at Our Streets Now. We started off as a volunteer-led organisation, and there are so many incredible people who really want to just muck in, get involved, do something to change these cultures. And the more you speak to these incredible volunteers, these incredible survivors often of different forms of gender-based violence, you're actually learning so much from them, and there's so much beauty in what they want to create better spaces, especially our young activist pool. They are incredible and constantly thinking of things that I would never think of, and I'm obsessed with every single one of them. And the second thing is actually we run a lot of mixed gender workshops in schools, and some of the things that the boys are coming out with are really nuanced and absolutely brilliant. And there are some conversations that I've had, especially in the last 6 months, where people are quite scared of a rise of the far right, or what transphobia looks like in the UK right now, and the rise of that. They want to have these conversations, and they want to engage in them, and they want to engage critically. And it's really, really exciting to have a space where you can open up that conversation and let them have that space without them feeling scared to have it with you. So that feels great.
That does feel great. Thank you for sharing that. And Eliza, we'll come to you.
Yeah, so I would say it's, for every bad or scary or horrible comment that you see online from whoever it might be around whether it's trolling around this issue and stuff, and whenever you say something there's always a little bit of a backlash for any of those bad comments. I'm seeing so many more supportive comments from not just women and people in my community, but from men as well, in a way that I haven't really seen before. And I'll get sent things by my community, and more and more men seem to be engaging in a positive way with the work online, and actually kind of being bystanders, standing up, calling things out in a way that I think people just feel a little bit more confident doing nowadays. So there is that side of things, and there's also just for however much kind of bad, horrible headlines and stuff you see in the news, that's just a fraction of the picture of what's happening. But what you don't see is all of the good work, and that's never spoken about in the news, and that never really makes the headlines in the same way. And just working with both of these amazing people here, we've worked together in different ways over the past few years, I'm constantly inspired by the work that is happening, that no one really doesn't get the same amount of attention and media spotlight, and it's happening, and there's a lot of incredible people working so hard to make things better. So that gives me a lot of hope.
Thank you so much. And Ellie, if you could give our closing words.
Yeah, I'm going to do two really quick as well. But on the same kind of narrative, I think the engagement that we've had from young men and women, but specifically I think men who are saying, this is the first time, now that I've had this education program that's taught, this is the first time I feel like I actually have the skills to be invited into the conversation and talk about it, and I feel empowered. We had a student the other day, 15-year-old boy, came to one of my facilitators after the session and said, I've only ever seen abuse in my family. Everybody I know in my family lives with domestic abuse, sexual abuse, and today that stops with me. So, seeing that from the students, we have amazing student advisory board members, we have got incredible community champion members, so much of our work is powered by young people. And the second thing is, I say those 52,000 stories. I mean, Soma, our CEO, she always says, 5 years ago, she was alone in her bedroom with a story that she could not bear to keep to herself anymore. And 5 years later, she's now one story in a sea of 52,000. And I think that survivor voice is so special, and a lot of the time it's really underrated, but it can make change.
Thank you so much. And we've heard so much from previous panels about how important preventative work is. And it's fair to say that all three of you seem to really be engaging young people. And it's so brilliant to hear that you're engaging with young boys and men as well, and that giving them the right support really early on really kind of roots out some of those problematic attitudes. So thank you all that you do. And thanks so much for having us today. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy.